The buzzards were already circling when Gideon Ashford spotted the crumpled figure on the plains, a dark smudge against the endless stretch of burnt grass and pale earth. He pulled his horse to a halt, squinting against the merciless July sun of 1878, his weathered hand rising to shield his eyes. The heat shimmered off the Nevada ground in waves, distorting the horizon into something that looked more like water than land. For a moment, he wondered if it was another mirage, another trick of this God-forsaken stretch between Awahi and nowhere. But the buzzards were real enough, their shadows gliding across the cracked earth with patient hunger. Gideon urged his mare forward, his chest tightening with each hoofbeat. As he drew closer, the figure took shape. A woman lying on her side, her dark dress torn and dust-covered, her hair matted with dirt and sweat. She was not moving. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud, and approached carefully. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her face sunburned to an angry red. When he knelt beside her, he could see the shallow rise and fall of her chest, still alive but barely. "Madam," he said, his voice hoarse from the dry air. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. A sound escaped her throat, something between a moan and a word, but nothing he could understand. She was delirious, lost somewhere between consciousness and death. Gideon reached for his canteen, uncorking it with practiced ease. He knew better than to let her drink too fast. In this condition, water could be as dangerous as poison if given too quickly. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders, lifting her gently, supporting her head against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, as if the sun had baked away everything but bone and sinew. "Easy now," he murmured, bringing the canteen to her cracked lips. "Just a little at a time." He poured slowly, letting the water wet her lips first, watching as her tongue moved reflexively, seeking moisture. Another small trickle, and this time her throat worked, swallowing. Her eyes opened then, unfocused and glazed with fever, the color of storm clouds over mountains. "That is it," Gideon said softly. "Slow now. You are safe." She tried to speak, but only a rasp emerged. Her hand moved weakly, grasping at his shirt with desperate fingers. He could feel her trembling against him, her body fighting to stay alive. "I have got you," he told her, though he was not certain she could understand. "I am going to get you out of here." He gave her another careful sip, then another, watching her face for signs that it was too much. Her breathing grew slightly stronger, her grip on his shirt tightening. When he pulled the canteen away, she made a sound of protest, but he shook his head. "More in a minute," he said. "Too much will make you sick." Gideon looked around, assessing the situation. His horse stood a few yards away, patient and familiar. The sun was still climbing toward its apex, and the temperature was already brutal. He needed to get her to shade, to shelter, and soon. The nearest town was Awahi, but that was a hard day's ride even for a healthy person. She would never survive it in this condition. He tried to remember what lay between here and there. There was an old way station, abandoned years ago when the stage routes changed. It was not much, but it would have walls and a roof, maybe a well that still held water. It was only a few hours north if he remembered correctly. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, bringing the canteen back to her lips. This time, when she swallowed, her eyes focused on his face for just a moment. Her lips moved, forming a sound. Faye, Faye," he repeated. "I am Gideon. I am going to take you somewhere safe." She did not respond, her eyes sliding closed again. He gave her a bit more water, then carefully lowered her back to the ground while he went to his horse. From his saddlebags, he pulled a blanket, knowing even as he did so how inadequate it was. But it would have to do. When he returned to her side, he wrapped the blanket around her, protecting her sunburned skin from further damage. Then he lifted her into his arms, surprised again by how light she was, how fragile. She curled against his chest instinctively, seeking whatever comfort his presence could offer. Getting her onto the horse was awkward, but Gideon managed it, settling her in front of the saddle before swinging up behind her. He kept one arm wrapped firmly around her waist, holding her upright while the other hand held the reins. She slumped against him, her head lolling back against his shoulder. "Stay with me, Faye," he said, nudging his mare into a steady walk. He could not risk more than that, not with her in this condition. "Just stay with me." The ride to the way station seemed to take forever. The sun beat down on them without mercy, and Gideon found himself talking to keep her conscious, telling her about his ranch outside Awahi, about his mare whose name was Copper, about anything and everything that came to mind. Sometimes Faye would stir, making small sounds that might have been responses. Other times she was completely still, and he would have to check to make sure she was still breathing. When the way station finally came into view, a squat adobe structure with a sagging roof, relief flooded through him. It was not much to look at, but it was shelter. He dismounted carefully, lifting Faye down with him and carried her to the door. The interior was dim and dusty, but blessedly cooler than outside. There was an old table, a couple of broken chairs, and in the corner, what looked like it might have once been a sleeping pallet. Gideon laid Faye down on the floor, using his blanket to cushion her from the hard, packed earth, then went back outside to tend to his horse. He found the well near the back of the building, and his heart lifted when he lowered the bucket and heard the splash of water. When he pulled it up, the water was brackish but drinkable. He filled his canteen and another container he found near the well, then led Copper to a patch of scrub where she could graze. Back inside, he knelt beside Faye and began the slow process of getting water into her. She was more responsive now, swallowing more readily, her eyes opening more frequently. After she had drunk her fill, he wet his bandana and began cleaning the dirt and blood from her face, working gently around her cracked lips and sunburned cheeks. "Where?" She finally managed to whisper, her voice like sandpaper. "Where am I?" "An old way station," Gideon told her. "About halfway between Nowhere and Awahi, Nevada. Do you remember what happened to you?" Her brow furrowed, pain flashing across her face. "Wagon. Attacked. Raiders, I think." Everyone ran. I ran, got lost." "How long ago?" "Days," she whispered. 3, 4, I do not know." Gideon felt a surge of anger at whoever had attacked her wagon train. Raiders had been getting bolder lately, targeting vulnerable travelers on the less traveled routes. But his anger would not help her now. "What about your family?" he asked gently. "Was anyone with you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "My uncle. He was taking me to California, to his ranch. I do not know if he survived." "What was his name? Maybe I can send word, try to find out." "Keaton." "Marcus Keaton." Gideon nodded, filing the name away. "Rest now. We will worry about finding him later. Right now, you need to recover." Over the next several hours, he tended to her with a patience he had not known he possessed. He gave her water regularly, letting her drink as much as she wanted now that the immediate danger of overhydration had passed. He found some dried beef in his saddlebags and soaked it in water until it was soft enough for her to chew. She managed a few bites before exhaustion overtook her, and she fell into a deep sleep. Gideon sat with his back against the wall, watching her in the fading light that filtered through the cracks in the roof. She was young, he realized, probably no more than 23 or 24. Even in her current state, he could see that she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and thick dark hair that would probably shine like silk when it was clean. There was something about her that tugged at him, something beyond simple compassion for another human being in distress. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. She was a woman in need of help, nothing more. He was 32 years old, long past the age of foolish romantic notions. He had his ranch, his horses, his quiet life. That was enough. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, as it always did in the high desert. Gideon started a small fire in the old fireplace, coaxing the flames to life with dry brush and bits of broken furniture. The warmth filled the small space, and he saw Faye curl closer to it in her sleep, seeking its comfort. He dozed fitfully through the night, waking often to check on her, to make sure she was still breathing, still warm enough. Once near dawn, she cried out in her sleep, her body thrashing. He moved to her side quickly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are safe," he told her. "You are safe, Faye." She quieted at his touch, at the sound of his voice, and settled back into sleep. Gideon found himself smoothing her hair back from her forehead, a tender gesture that surprised him. He pulled his hand back, returning to his spot against the wall, but his eyes remained on her until the sun rose. By morning, Faye was markedly improved. She was able to sit up on her own, though she moved slowly, every muscle clearly aching. Gideon helped her drink more water and eat some more of the softened beef. Color was beginning to return to her face, though her lips were still cracked and her skin still angry red from the sun. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," she said, but there was a hint of humor in her voice. "But better than yesterday, I think. You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, meeting his eyes, "not anyone. You stayed with me. You could have left me in Awahi, left me with someone else, but you stayed." Gideon felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the growing warmth of the day. "You were not in any condition to travel further. This was the closest shelter." "Still," she insisted, "thank you." They spent another day at the way station, giving Faye more time to recover her strength. Gideon made trips to the well, bringing back water for drinking and for washing. He gave her privacy while she cleaned herself up as best she could, standing guard outside the door. When she called him back in, her face was cleaner, her hair combed through with her fingers, and she looked more like a person and less like a victim of the desert. They talked while the day passed, sharing stories to fill the silence. Faye told him about her life in Missouri, about how her parents had died of fever the previous winter, leaving her alone. Her uncle Marcus had written, offering her a home on his ranch in California. She had sold everything she owned and bought passage on a wagon train heading west. "I thought it would be an adventure," she said softly, staring at the dying fire. "I thought it would be the start of a new life." "It still can be," Gideon said. "Once you are stronger, I will take you to Awahi. We can send telegrams, try to find your uncle. Or if you prefer, I can arrange passage for you to continue to California." She looked at him then, really looked at him, her gray eyes searching his face. "What if I do not want to go to California?" The question hung in the air between them. Gideon felt his heart beat faster, felt something shift in his chest. "Then you will stay in Nevada," he said carefully. "Awahi is a good town, small but growing. There are opportunities for work, for building a life. Do you live in Awahi?" "Just outside. I have a ranch. Cattle mostly and some horses. It is not much, but it is mine." "It sounds nice," she said, and something in her voice made him look at her more closely. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite read, something soft and wondering. "It is," he said, "quiet, peaceful, good land." "Do you live alone?" "Yes." "Well, I have a couple of ranch hands who help during busy seasons, but mostly it is just me." "That sounds lonely." Gideon considered this. "Sometimes, but I like the quiet, I like the work." "I can understand that," Faye said, "after everything." "The quiet sounds wonderful." That night, as they prepared to sleep, Faye spoke again. "Gideon?" "Yes." "Will you stay close tonight? I keep having nightmares about the desert, about the buzzards. I know it is foolish, but—" "It is not foolish," he said gently. He moved his blanket closer to hers, near enough that she could reach out and touch him if she needed to, but not so close as to be improper. "I am right here. You are safe." "I know," she whispered. "With you, I know I am safe." Something in his chest tightened at her words, at the trust in her voice. He lay awake for a long time, listening to her breathing even out into sleep, wondering what was happening to him. The next day, they set out for Awahi. Faye was strong enough to ride now, though Gideon kept their pace slow and steady, stopping often to rest and water. She rode in front of him again, and he was acutely aware of her presence, of the way she leaned back against him, trusting him to keep her safe. They talked as they rode, the conversation flowing easily between them. She asked him about his life, about how he had come to Nevada, about his ranch. He told her about growing up in Texas, about coming west after the war to start fresh, about finding the land that would become his home. "It must be beautiful," she said. "It is, green valleys, good water, the mountains in the distance. I will show you if you like, when we reach Awahi." "I would like that very much." They reached Awahi as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The town was small, just a main street with a handful of businesses, a church, and scattered houses. But it was civilization, and Gideon could see Faye relax as they rode in. He took her to the hotel first, a modest two-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Chen. The woman took one look at Faye and immediately began fussing over her, promising a hot bath and a proper meal and a clean bed. "I will come by tomorrow," Gideon told Faye as Mrs. Chen ushered her inside. "Make sure you are settled, and I will send that telegram about your uncle." "Gideon," Faye said, turning back to him. "Thank you for everything." He tipped his hat. "Get some rest, Faye." But as he rode out toward his ranch, he found himself looking back at the hotel, at the window that he knew must be hers, and wondering why leaving her felt so difficult. Over the next week, Gideon found himself riding into Awahi far more often than necessary. He told himself it was to check on Faye, to make sure she was recovering properly. He had sent the telegram about Marcus Keaton, and they were waiting for a response. It was only natural that he would want to be there when news arrived. But the truth was, he looked forward to seeing her. He looked forward to the way her face would light up when he walked into the hotel dining room, the way she would smile and gesture for him to join her. They would talk for hours, about everything and nothing, and time seemed to stop when he was with her. Faye was blooming back to life. The sunburn faded, her lips healed, and color returned to her cheeks. Mrs. Chen had helped her acquire some new clothes, proper dresses that fit her slender frame. She looked beautiful, and Gideon was not the only man in town who noticed. He watched with growing irritation as other men began to pay attention to her. The banker, Thomas Holbrook, was particularly persistent, finding excuses to visit the hotel, to talk to Faye, to offer his assistance. Gideon wanted to plant his fist in the man's face, but he had no right. Faye was not his. She was a woman he had helped, nothing more. "You are quiet today," Faye observed one afternoon as they sat on the hotel porch. "Is something wrong?" "No," Gideon said, then sighed. "Yes, maybe." "Which is it?" He looked at her gray eyes watching him with concern, and something in him broke. "I do not like seeing other men pay attention to you." Faye's eyebrows rose. "Why not? Because—" He stopped, frustrated with himself, with his inability to find the words. "Because I found you, I saved you, you are yours," she finished softly. "No, I did not mean it like that. You are your own person. You can talk to whoever you want. It is just—" "Gideon," she said, and her voice was gentle. "What if I do not want to talk to them? What if the only person I want to talk to is you?" He stared at her. "Faye." "I mean it," she said. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has been the best part of coming west. Not the adventure I thought I wanted, but something better, something real. You barely know me. I know that you are kind. I know that you are patient. I know that when I was dying in the desert, you stopped and saved me. You poured water slowly when you could have just dumped it and left. You stayed with me, took care of me, asked nothing in return. I know that you are a good man, Gideon Ashford, and I know that when I am with you, I feel safe. I feel happy. I feel like I am home. Gideon felt his throat tighten with emotion. I feel the same way, he admitted. When I am with you, it is like everything makes sense. Like I have been waiting for something without knowing what it was, and then I found you. So what do we do about it? Faye asked. I do not know, he said honestly. We should wait. Wait to hear about your uncle. Wait to make sure this is real, not just gratitude or... It is not gratitude, Faye said firmly. I know the difference. This is real, Gideon. I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, brave and terrifying. Gideon reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were small and delicate, but her grip was strong. I am falling in love with you too, he said. But Faye, I do not have much to offer. My ranch is modest. Life there is hard work. It is not the grand adventure you dreamed of. I do not want a grand adventure anymore, she said. I want a home. I want a life with someone who cares about me. I want you. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. Then you have me, for as long as you want me. That might be a very long time. Good, he said and smiled. That is very good. The telegram about Marcus Keaton arrived 3 days later. The news was both good and bad. Marcus had survived the attack, but he had been injured and was recovering at a ranch in Idaho. He sent his relief that Faye was alive and safe, and his blessing for whatever decision she wanted to make about her future. He understood if she no longer wanted to come to California after everything that had happened. So you are free, Gideon said as they sat together in the hotel dining room, the telegram between them on the table. You can go to your uncle, or you can go anywhere else you want. I want to stay here, Faye said. With you, if you will have me. If I will have you, Gideon laughed. Faye, I would be the luckiest man in Nevada if you stayed. Then it is settled, she said, smiling. Now, are you going to show me this ranch of yours, or are you going to make me wait forever? The next day, Gideon brought a gentle mare from his ranch for Faye to ride, and they made the journey together. It was a beautiful ride, through rolling hills covered in sagebrush and wild grass, following a creek that ran clear and cold. As they crested the final hill, the ranch spread out before them. It was modest, as Gideon had said, but to Faye's eyes it was perfect. A sturdy cabin sat near the creek with a barn and several corrals nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance and horses stood in a fenced pasture, their tails swishing at flies. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and majestic against the blue sky. It is beautiful, Faye breathed. Gideon, it is perfect. He helped her down from her horse, and they walked together toward the cabin. Inside it was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a bed in the corner. There was a separate room that served as a kitchen, and another small room that Gideon explained he used for storage. It needs work, he said. Needs a woman's touch, curtains, maybe some proper dishes. I have been living rough for so long I barely notice anymore. I can help with that, Faye said. If you want me to. I want you to, he said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Faye Keaton, I know we have not known each other long. I know this is fast, maybe too fast. But I am 32 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I love you, and I want you to be my wife if you will have me. Faye felt tears spring to her eyes. Yes, she said. Yes, Gideon, I will marry you. He pulled her into his arms then, kissing her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Faye felt her heart soar with happiness. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not California, not her uncle's ranch, but this. This man, this place, this love. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Awahi. Mrs. Chen stood up as Faye's witness, and one of Gideon's ranch hands stood up for him. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Faye wore a new dress of soft blue cotton, and Gideon wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his face clean shaven. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon kissed her with such tenderness that Faye felt like her heart might burst. The small crowd in the church cheered, and Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. They held a small reception at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Faye danced with Gideon, his arms strong and sure around her, and she thought about how far she had come. From dying in the desert to dancing at her own wedding, all because one good man had stopped and stayed. That night, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife. Gideon carried Faye over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the cabin that was now their home. He had worked hard over the past weeks to make it ready for her, adding touches he thought she might like. There were curtains on the windows now, made from fabric Mrs. Chen had helped him select. There was a new quilt on the bed, pieced together in a pattern of stars. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Gideon," Faye said, looking around with wonder, "you did all this for me. I wanted you to feel at home," he said. "I wanted you to know that this is your place as much as it is mine, more than mine if you want it to be." She turned to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "It is our place, yours and mine, our home." That night they made love for the first time, tenderly and with great care. Gideon was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Faye had never known such intimacy, such connection with another person. Afterward, lying in his arms, listening to his heartbeat beneath her ear, she felt complete. Life on the ranch was hard work, but Faye threw herself into it with determination. She learned to milk the cow Gideon kept, to gather eggs from the chickens, to tend the garden she planted behind the cabin. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to preserve food for the winter, to mend clothes and make soap. Gideon taught her to ride better, to handle a rifle for protection, to read the signs of weather and seasons. In return, she transformed the cabin into a true home. She added more curtains, more decorations, made it warm and inviting. She organized Gideon's scattered possessions, created a system for their supplies. She filled the space with laughter and conversation and love. The ranch hands, when they came to help with branding or roundup, treated her with respect and genuine affection. She fed them well and listened to their stories, and they in turn worked hard for Gideon, knowing he had found a good woman. As fall approached, Faye realized she was pregnant. She was nervous to tell Gideon, worried about how he would react, but when she finally found the courage, his face lit up with such joy that her fears melted away. "A baby," he said, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked. "Happy." He laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Faye, I am beyond happy. I am blessed. You have given me everything. A home, love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Faye suffered from sickness in the early months, and Gideon worried constantly, hovering over her, making sure she rested enough, ate enough. Mrs. Chen came out from town several times to check on her, bringing advice and supplies and reassurance. But as winter settled in, Faye began to feel better. Her stomach grew round with their child, and Gideon would spend evenings with his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick and move. He talked to the baby, told stories, sang songs he remembered from his own childhood. "What do you want?" Faye asked one night as they sat by the fire. "A boy or a girl, I do not care," Gideon said honestly. "As long as you are both healthy, I will be happy with whatever we get." "I think it is a boy," Faye said. "He kicks like a horse." Gideon laughed. "Then he will be a rancher like his father, or she will be," Faye corrected. "Girls can kick hard too." "Fair enough," Gideon agreed, kissing her forehead. "Boy or girl, they will be loved." The baby came in early March, during a late snowstorm that kept Mrs. Chen from reaching them in time. Gideon had to deliver his own son, with only Faye's instructions and his own experience with calving cattle to guide him. It was terrifying and messy and the most incredible thing he had ever done. When he finally held his son in his arms, cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket, Gideon wept. The baby was perfect, small and red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs. He placed the baby in Faye's arms and she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she said. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Gideon asked. "What about Gabriel?" Faye suggested. "After your father," Gideon felt his throat tighten. His father had died when he was young and he rarely spoke of him. But the fact that Faye remembered that she thought to honor him this way touched him deeply. "Gabriel Ashford," he said. "It is perfect, Mrs." Chen arrived 2 days later once the storm had cleared and checked over both mother and baby with satisfaction. "You did good work," she told Gideon. "Both of them are healthy and strong." "I am glad I did not have to do it alone," Gideon admitted. "Faye was the strong one. I was just there to catch him." "That is not true," Faye said from the bed where she was nursing Gabriel. "You were wonderful. You kept me calm, kept me focused. I could not have done it without you." As spring turned to summer, life settled into a new rhythm. Gabriel grew quickly, a healthy baby with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. Faye managed to balance caring for him with her work around the ranch, often carrying him in a sling as she went about her tasks. Gideon was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him the world even though Gabriel was too young to understand. "You are going to spoil him," Faye teased one evening as she watched Gideon rock Gabriel to sleep. "I am going to love him," Gideon corrected. "There is a difference." "I know," Faye said softly. "You are a wonderful father. I knew you would be." 1 year became 2, then 3. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Gideon expanded the herd, bought more land, built a new barn. Faye's garden flourished, providing them with vegetables year-round. Gabriel grew into a toddler, then a young boy, curious and energetic and full of life. When Gabriel was 4, Faye became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1884, their daughter was born. They named her Grace, and she was beautiful, with Gideon's dark eyes and Faye's delicate features. "Now we have one of each," Gideon said, cradling Grace while Gabriel peered at his new sister with fascination. "She is so small," Gabriel said. "You were small once too," Faye told him. "She will grow, just like you did." Gabriel looked skeptical but reached out carefully to touch Grace's tiny hand. When her fingers curled around his face lit up with wonder. "She is holding me, she is," Gideon said. "Because she already knows you are her big brother, and big brothers are very important." Gabriel took his role seriously, always wanting to help with Grace, to make sure she was safe and happy. Watching them together, watching her family grow and thrive, Faye felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and growth. Gabriel learned to ride, to rope, to help with the cattle. Grace grew into a spirited child who followed her brother everywhere, determined to do everything he could do. The ranch continued to prosper, and Gideon's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread throughout the territory. Faye became active in the growing Awahi community, helping to establish a proper school, organizing church socials, supporting new families who arrived in the area. She never forgot what it was like to be alone and desperate, and she made sure that anyone who needed help found it. Sometimes, usually in the evenings when the children were asleep, and they sat together on the porch watching the sun set, Faye and Gideon would talk about that day in the desert. About how different both their lives might have been if he had ridden a different direction, if he had not stopped, if he had not stayed. "You ever wonder what would have happened?" Faye asked one such evening. "If you had not found me?" "I would have lived a half-life," Gideon said without hesitation. "I would have had my ranch, my work, but I would have been alone. I would never have known what it meant to truly love someone, to have a family. You gave me everything, Faye. You saved my life," she reminded him. "And you saved mine," he said. "Maybe not from death, but from loneliness, from going through life without ever really living it. We saved each other." She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, always." When Gabriel turned 15 and Grace 11, in the summer of 1893, Faye discovered she was pregnant again. It came as a surprise, as she had thought her childbearing years were behind her. But the pregnancy progressed normally, and that winter they welcomed twin boys into the family. They named them Jacob and James, and Gabriel and Grace were thrilled to have baby brothers to dote on. "You realize we are going to have to build onto the cabin," Gideon said, looking at their suddenly much larger family. "I realize," Faye said, smiling at the chaos around them. "But it is a good problem to have." They did build onto the cabin, adding 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. Gabriel, nearly a man now, worked alongside his father on the construction, learning carpentry to add to his ranching skills. Grace helped her mother with the twins, showing a natural gift for caregiving. As the new century approached, the Ashford family was a fixture in Awahi. Their ranch was one of the most successful in the area, and their children were well known and well liked. Gabriel had grown into a fine young man, already courting a girl from a neighboring ranch. Grace was developing into a strong, independent young woman who had her father's skill with horses and her mother's compassionate heart. The twins, Jacob and James, were 6 years old and inseparable, always getting into mischief but bringing laughter and energy to the household. They had Faye's gray eyes and Gideon's adventurous spirit, and keeping up with them kept both parents feeling young. On a warm evening in June of 1900, the family gathered on the expanded porch for supper. It had become a tradition, eating outside when the weather was nice, watching the sun set over the mountains. Gabriel had brought his sweetheart, a kind girl named Emma, and Grace had invited her best friend from town. The twins were arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens in the morning. Gideon looked around at all of them, at this family he and Faye had built, and felt his heart swell with gratitude. 22 years had passed since that day in the desert. 22 years of love and work and joy. There had been hard times, certainly. Years when the cattle prices dropped, when drought threatened the ranch, when illness struck. But they had weathered it all together, their love for each other the foundation that everything else was built on. "What are you thinking about?" Faye asked softly, noticing his expression. "About how lucky I am," he said. "About how one decision, one choice to stop and help changed everything." "The best decision you ever made," she said. "No," he corrected. "The second best. The best decision was asking you to marry me." She smiled, that same smile that had captivated him all those years ago. "And mine was saying yes." Gabriel stood then, clearing his throat nervously. Actually, since we are all here, I have something I want to say. Emma and we have been courting for almost 2 years now. And I have spoken to her father, and he has given his blessing. Emma, I know I should do this more privately, but I want my family here. Will you marry me?" Emma's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Yes, of course, yes." The porch erupted in cheers and congratulations. Faye hugged Emma, welcoming her to the family, while Gideon shook Gabriel's hand and then pulled him into a tight embrace. "You chose well, son," he said. "I am proud of you." "I learned from the best," Gabriel said. "You and Ma showed me what real love looks like. What a real partnership looks like. That is what I want with Emma." As the celebration continued, Faye found herself stepping away for a moment, walking to the edge of the porch to look out at the land. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. In the distance, she could see the cattle grazing peacefully. Closer in, the horses moved in their pasture. This ranch, this home, this life, it was everything she had never known she wanted. She thought about that girl who had left Missouri all those years ago, seeking adventure and a new life. She had found both, just not in the way she had expected. The adventure had been in building something real, something lasting. The new life had been in love and family, in the daily work of making a home. "Thank you," she whispered, though she was not sure who she was thanking. God, perhaps, or fate, or just the universe itself for bringing her and Gideon together. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back against Gideon's chest, knowing his touch as intimately as she knew her own heartbeat. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, echoing her earlier question. "About water," she said. "About how you poured it slow when you could have just given up on me. About how you stayed." "I will always stay," he said. "For as long as I have breath in my body, I will be right here with you." "I know," she said. "And I will be here with you." They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the sounds of their family's laughter and conversation. 22 years, and it still felt like not enough time. But they had built something beautiful, something that would last long after they were gone. Their children would carry on the ranch, would tell their own children the story of how their grandparents met. The story of how a dying woman on the plains had been saved by a cowboy who poured water slow and stayed. As the years continued to pass, life on the ranch evolved but remained rooted in the love that Gideon and Faye shared. Gabriel married Emma in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Awahi, and they built a small house on the far end of the ranch property. Gabriel became Gideon's full partner in running the ranch, bringing fresh ideas and energy while respecting the wisdom his father had accumulated over decades. Grace grew into a remarkable young woman. When she was 19, she announced her intention to become a teacher, and though it was unusual for the time, Gideon and Faye supported her completely. She attended a teaching college in Carson City and returned to Awahi to teach at the school her mother had helped establish years before. She eventually married a surveyor named David Marsh, a quiet, thoughtful man who appreciated her intelligence and independence. The twins, Jacob and James, remained as inseparable as ever. They were natural horsemen, with an almost supernatural ability to work with even the most difficult animals. Together, they developed a side business breeding and training horses that became renowned throughout Nevada and beyond. They built their own homes near each other on the ranch, and both eventually married sisters from a family in nearby Elko. Through it all, Gideon and Faye remained the center of the growing family. Their cabin, expanded several times over the years, became the gathering place for Sunday dinners and holidays and celebrations. Grandchildren began to arrive, filling the house with noise and laughter and life. Gideon, now in his 60s, had silver in his hair and lines on his face, but his hands were still strong and his eyes still sharp. He spent his days working alongside Gabriel and his grandsons, teaching them everything he knew about ranching, about the land, about treating animals and people with respect. Faye, in her early 50s, had softened with age but lost none of her determination. She had become something of a matriarch in Awahi, the woman everyone turned to for advice or help or comfort. She delivered babies, nursed the sick, mediated disputes, and organized community events. But her favorite role was grandmother, and she spent countless hours with her grandchildren, telling them stories, teaching them to read, showing them how to find joy in simple things. One evening in the spring of 1908, after a particularly full Sunday dinner with all their children and grandchildren present, Gideon and Faye found themselves alone on the porch again. Everyone else had finally gone home, and the ranch was quiet except for the sounds of settling animals and night birds. 30 years, Faye said softly. Has it really been 30 years since we married? 30 years since we married, Gideon agreed. 31 since I found you in the desert. The best 30 years of my life, she said. Mine too, he said. He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically, a gesture they had repeated countless times over the decades. Do you have any regrets? Not a single one, Faye said firmly. This life, this family, it is more than I ever dreamed of, more than I knew was possible. What about you? My only regret is that we do not have another 30 years ahead of us, Gideon said. But I am grateful for every day we have had, every moment. You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, Faye Ashford, still the strongest, still the love of my life. Tears filled Faye's eyes. You are still my hero, still the man who saved me in more ways than one, still my home. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The life they had built together stretched out around them, the land, the buildings, the children and grandchildren, the legacy of love and hard work. It was everything, and it was enough. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows, as life always does. They lost Mrs. Chen, who passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86. They celebrated as more grandchildren arrived, as the ranch continued to prosper, as Awahi grew from a small settlement into a proper town with a school, a hospital, and paved streets. Gideon's health began to decline in his late 60s. His joints ached from decades of hard work, and his heart was not as strong as it once was. But he refused to slow down completely, still riding out to check on the cattle, still working alongside his sons and grandsons, still doing what he loved. Faye, ever vigilant, watched over him carefully. She made sure he rested when he needed to, that he ate well, that he did not push himself too hard. And when he protested, she would simply look at him with those gray eyes and say, "You poured water slow for me once. Now it is my turn to take care of you." And he would quiet because he understood. Love was not just about the grand gestures, the dramatic rescues. It was about the daily care, the patient tending, the staying when things got hard. In the autumn of 1915, when the aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides and the air had that crystalline quality that came before winter, Gideon had a heart attack while working in the barn. Gabriel and James found him and carried him to the house, and the doctor was summoned from town. But everyone knew, including Gideon himself, that this was the beginning of the end. Faye sat beside his bed, holding his hand, refusing to leave. Their children and grandchildren came to say goodbye, to tell him they loved him, to thank him for everything he had taught them. But through it all, Faye was there, constant and unwavering. "I am sorry," Gideon whispered to her one night when they were alone. "I wanted more time with you." "We had 37 years, Faye said, though tears were streaming down her face. 37 beautiful years. Some people never get even one. We were blessed, Gideon, so blessed. I do not want to leave you, I know. But when the time comes, do not be afraid, I will be all right. The children will take care of me, and I will see you again someday, I know I will. He squeezed her hand weakly. Promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy. Do not just exist without me. Live, Faye, really live. I promise, she said, though the words nearly broke her. Gideon Ashford died on a clear October morning with Faye holding his hand and all his children gathered around him. His last words were, I love you, spoken to Faye with his final breath. And though her heart shattered, Faye knew that he had died as he had lived, surrounded by love, at peace, at home. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Nevada. People came from all over to pay their respects to a man who had been fair, honest, and kind. The church could not hold everyone, so the service was held outside, under the huge cottonwood tree near the creek where Gideon had proposed to Faye all those years ago. Faye stood through it all with dry eyes and a straight back, her children beside her, her grandchildren gathered around. She spoke at the service, telling the story of how they had met, how he had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it. She spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his capacity for love, and she spoke of the family they had built together, the legacy he was leaving behind. He was a good man, she concluded, the best man I have ever known, and I was blessed to be his wife. After Gideon's death, Faye did keep her promise. She continued to live, not just exist. She remained active in the community, still helping where she was needed. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, pouring into them the love and wisdom she had accumulated over a lifetime. She helped Gabriel run the ranch, her mind still sharp, her understanding of the land and the business still valuable, but she also allowed herself to grieve. In the evenings, when she was alone, she would sit on the porch where she and Gideon had spent so many hours together, and she would talk to him. She would tell him about her day, about what the children were doing, about the memories that surfaced at unexpected moments. And sometimes, when the wind moved just right, she could almost feel his presence beside her, his hand in hers. The years passed. Faye grew older, her dark hair turning silver, her face becoming lined with the marks of a life well lived. She became a great-grandmother, marveling at the newest generation of Ashfords. She watched as Awahi modernized, as automobiles replaced horses on the streets, as electricity came to the town. The world was changing rapidly, but the ranch remained a constant, a piece of the Old West preserved and cherished. On a warm evening in July of 1928, Faye sat on her porch surrounded by her family. It was her 70th birthday, and everyone had come to celebrate. Gabriel was there with Emma and their children and grandchildren. Grace had come from Carson City with her family. The twins, now middle-aged men, were there with their wives and numerous offspring. The porch and yard were full of people, all of them descendants of the love story that had begun in the desert 50 years before. As the sun set and the party wound down, Faye found herself thinking about that day once again. She thought about the girl she had been, dying under the merciless sun. She thought about the moment she had seen Gideon's face for the first time, felt the water on her lips, heard his voice telling her she was safe. She thought about every moment since then, the challenges and triumphs, the sorrows and joys, the ordinary days that had woven together into an extraordinary life. "What are you thinking about, Grandma?" asked one of her great-granddaughters, a little girl of about 6 with Faye's gray eyes. "I am thinking about water," Faye said, pulling the child onto her lap, "about how important it is, about how it can save a life." "Tell me a story," the child begged, and Faye did. She told the story she had told countless times before but never tired of telling. She told about the desert, about the cowboy, about water poured slow and a man who stayed. She told about love that grew in unexpected places, about how sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments. She told about building a life together, about family and home and legacy. When she finished, the little girl was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That was Grandpa Gideon, was it not? And the lady was you." "Yes," Faye said, "that was us. I wish I could have met him." "He would have loved you," Faye said, hugging the child close. "He loved all of you, even the ones who were not born yet when he died. Because you are all part of the family we built together. You are all part of our love story." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Faye felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had lived a full life, a good life. She had loved and been loved in return. She had built something that would last long after she was gone. And when her own time came, she would not be afraid, because she knew Gideon was waiting for her on the other side, ready to pour water slow and stay with her forever. Faye lived for another 7 years, remaining active and engaged until the very end. In the spring of 1935, at the age of 77, she died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by photographs of her family and the quilt Gideon had given her on their wedding night. Her children found her with a slight smile on her face, and they knew she had gone to join the man she had loved for more than half a century. She was buried beside Gideon on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under the wide Nevada sky they had both loved. The funeral was even larger than Gideon's had been, a testament to the impact she had made on everyone who knew her. The minister spoke of her kindness, her strength, her generosity, but it was Gabriel who truly captured who she had been. "My mother was a survivor," he said, standing at her grave. She survived the desert, survived losing everything, survived hardship and heartbreak. But more than that, she knew how to live. She knew how to love. She taught us all that life is precious, that family matters, that love is worth fighting for. She and my father built something beautiful together, and we are all the beneficiaries of their love. They showed us what it means to truly commit to another person, to stay when things get hard, to pour water slow when someone needs it. That is their legacy, and we will carry it forward. The Ashford Ranch continued to prosper through the generations, remaining in the family for decades to come. The original cabin, expanded so many times, was eventually preserved as a historical landmark, a piece of Nevada's history. People would come to see it, to hear the story of Gideon and Faye, to understand what life was like in those early days. The story of how they met became something of a legend in Awahi and the surrounding areas. It was told to children as an example of compassion and kindness. It was told to couples as an illustration of true love. It was told to anyone facing hardship as a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. And in the end, that was the truth of it. A woman dying on the plains, a cowboy who stopped to help, water poured slow, and a man who stayed. From that simple act of compassion had come a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that would never be forgotten. It was a love story for the ages, played out against the backdrop of the Wild West, as real and enduring as the Nevada mountains themselves. The ranch still stands today, now run by the 6th generation of Ashfords. In the main house, there is a painting that hangs above the fireplace. It was commissioned by Gabriel years after both his parents had passed, painted from old photographs and his own memories. It shows a young woman with gray eyes and a young man with dark hair, standing together on a hillside overlooking the ranch. They are holding hands, smiling, the sun setting behind them in shades of gold and amber. At the bottom of the frame, a small plaque reads simply, Gideon and Faye Ashford. He poured water slow, he stayed, and they built a love that lasted forever. And every Ashford who grows up on that ranch knows the story. They know about the desert, about the rescue, about the love that grew from that fateful meeting. They know that sometimes the greatest things in life come from the simplest acts of kindness. They know that real love is about staying, about patience, about pouring water slow when someone needs it most. And they know that their family, their home, their entire existence is built on the foundation of that love. A love that began with a dying woman on the plains and a cowboy who refused to ride past. A love that was nurtured through hard work and dedication and unwavering commitment. A love that produced children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry forward the values their ancestors held dear. On summer evenings, when the family gathers for barbecues and celebrations, when the children run laughing through the same fields their great-great-great-grandparents once tended, when the adults sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the same mountains, the presence of Gideon and Faye feels very near. Not in a ghostly or sad way, but in the way that love lingers in places where it was strong. In the way that sacrifice and dedication and commitment create echoes that resonate through time. And sometimes, when the youngest children ask about the painting, about the serious-looking man and the beautiful woman with the slight smile, the adults will tell the story one more time. They will speak of the Wild West, of hardship and survival, of a time when life was harder but in some ways simpler. They will speak of a man who saw someone in need and stopped to help, of water poured slow, of patience and care, of staying when it would have been easier to leave. And they will speak of the love that grew from that moment, a love that transformed two lonely people into a family, two individuals into a partnership that changed not only their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. They will speak of 50 years together, of 4 children and countless grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of a ranch that became a home and a home that became a legacy. And in the telling, the story becomes new again. It becomes not just history but inspiration, not just the past but a guide for the future. It reminds everyone who hears it that love is worth fighting for, that kindness matters, that the simple act of staying with someone when they need you most can change the course of history. This is the story of Gideon Ashford and Faye Ashford. It is a story of the American West, of survival and prosperity, of hardship overcome and dreams realized. But more than anything, it is a love story. A story about how one man's compassion saved a woman's life, and how that woman's love saved his soul. A story about building something beautiful together, something that would outlast them both and continue to grow and flourish long after they were gone. It is a story that began with cracked lips and water poured slow, with a cowboy who stayed. And it is a story that has no ending, because true love never really ends. It transforms, it evolves, it continues in the hearts and lives of those who come after. And as long as there are Ashfords working that land in Nevada, as long as there are people who remember and tell the tale, the love of Gideon and Faye will live on, eternal and unbreakable, a testament to the power of compassion, commitment, and staying when it matters most.